All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar. If you haven't joined us before, our structure is not going to change. It's going to be 20 to 25 minutes of content. And then towards the end, we'll leave a little bit of time to catch up on the questions. If you do have any questions as we go through the content, feel free to add it in the Q&A section. Just make sure that you do use the Q&A feature and not the chat, because that will allow us to track all the questions. This session is also going to be recorded and posted so that you guys can refer to it later on, and we'll send out an email with the details and the link for the recording later on. Okay, so my name is Maddie. I'm one of the support members here at Nexudus, and today we're going to be talking about floor plans and occupancy. I know that for quite a few of our customers, this is a topic that maybe has eluded them or it's a little bit tricky. So today we're going to work through demystifying this topic for you guys. In terms of the content that's going to be covered, we're going to be looking at what are floor plans and understanding what they're used for, how to create a floor plan. We'll look at the different types of items that are included in a floor plan. So dedicated desks, offices, hot desks, and what we call others. We'll also look at how to assign this to a customer. And then we'll be finishing off with occupancy reports. And then we'll touch on a couple of additional features that the floor plan can also be used for. So let's go ahead and identify what we want to get out of this webinar. So by the end, you guys should be very familiar with floor plans. You should be able to create them. You should be able to assign the items to a customer. You should feel comfortable reading the reports that are generated and understand where that data is coming from. So what are floor plans? The floor plans are a feature that basically allow you to create a physical representation of your offices, desks in the platform to allow you to track that into the system. And as we mentioned, there's going to be 4 items in the floor plan. There's going to be what we call dedicated desks, offices, hot desks, and others. So as we go through, we're actually going to show an example of how to create this. We'll look at those items specifically. Each of these items that we've identified, within them, there's also going to be additional details that we can add for the purposes of reporting later on as well. So there will be capacity, size, target, price, and area. And again, we will look at these in detail, but just so you guys have an overview of what information we'll be looking at in the floor plan. So let's go ahead, let's head over to our dashboard, and let's get started on actually creating a floor plan. So if you're in the home page, what you want to do is head over to the inventory, click on floor plans, and this is where we can start by creating our floor plan. Now, by the end, you can have something that looks, let me reload the page really quick, but you will be able to have a really nice representation of the system of your desks. So here we have our first floor, and once it loads, you'll see it'll look really nice and clean in the system. A little bit of technical difficulties here. There we go. So as you can see, we have our floor plan. You can see here the different items assigned to a customer. The ones that are in red are the ones that are occupied. So by the end, and once we've completed this whole session, you'll understand why it looks like this, and you'll be able to recreate it as well. In order to create a floor plan, we can go up here and create on the add a new floor plan. We'll give it a name. So in this case, let's call it second floor. And you do need to upload an image. I have one here that I used earlier, so we're just going to use this as an example. It does have to be an image format when you're uploading this. So it does have to be a JPEG, PNG, some sort of image. It cannot be a PDF file or a CAD. It does have to be in the image format. And the background scale by default is going to stay at 20. We'll look and see how it looks and feel in proportion to the desk items. And then this can be amended in order to either shrink the image in comparison to the items or scale it up. So once I click save, we'll now have our second floor down here. And it does take a little bit of time just for the system to render that image here so that we can be able to upload the items. So we created a floor plan. We called it the second floor. If we want to create items, it's a fairly straightforward process now. We can just go to these little icons right here on the top right, and we can click to add office. So once I click add office, you can see the little item is created down here. Now, if I try and drag and drop, it's not going to work. Nothing's really happening. In order to do that, I have to unlock the desks, and that way I'm able to drag it over here to our nice little office and place it where I need it to be. Now, we've created the first item as a template. What we can do is we can go in and we can edit that item. We can give it a proper name. So let's call it Office A, or actually let's call it Office 1. The customer field here, we're actually going to leave that blank. And going forward, I would suggest not using this, at least not for the purposes of what we're talking today. The way we'll attach these offices to customers is through contracts, and we'll go into detail about that. But this is just, if you want to placehold a desk, you can do that by this little icon. But today we're going to be focusing primarily on linking these through contracts. Down here we have the properties, and you can see there's an item to connect a resource. Now, this is a feature that's actually going to be launched in the next few weeks. We're going to do a little bit of a reveal at the end where we show you this new feature that's upcoming. But for now, what we're going to focus on is the items that are linked to today's presentation. We're going to be wrapping back around to this new feature once it is released. So we talked about the different variables that we can essentially include to get information later on. We have the size. So let's say we have this at 50, a capacity of how many people can be in that office. So we'll say 5. And then the target price is how much this office should be rented out for. So in this case, we're going to set that to 1,500. The area allows you to group desks or offices into a category of your own. So if you want to go ahead and create different categories so you can see this in the reports later on, you can use this area here and basically create your own categories. This is going to be for reporting purposes. So once we go in, we've added our details, we have everything set, we can save that, exit out of this little motor window, and now we have our first item. Now, if I go ahead and I click on this item one more time, what's going to happen is you see that a new item gets created. And now that we've set the naming convention here of Office 1, what we can see is the system actually takes that into account and it does Office 2. And if I create a third one, it would create Office 3 in there as well. So we can see the little lock desk is not toggled, so I can drag and drop it over here in our office. Same with Office 3. If I need to amend these, I can go in and change the details, same as I did with the other office. So if I want to give it a size, a capacity, target price, or area, I can do that here. Now, this is one way that you can go about creating the desks and offices in the floor plan. An alternative version is by actually going after you've created that initial floor plan, so you've uploaded the image and you've named the floor, rather than creating from the UI, you could actually come in here into the settings, and then under imports, there's floor plan items, which you can download the template and you can upload that all at once. So if you have quite a large number of desks, offices in your co-working space or in your shared office space, then I would suggest using this, as it will allow you to do this process much more quickly than actually going through the UI and adding them one at a time. So with creating items, again, inventory, floor plan, we can go in, we can add the floor plan. Once we've created them, we can shift between the different floor plans that we've created. And if we ever need to amend them, we can do that straight from the from the floor plan here. If I wanted to see everything that I have in my inventory for the floor plan in a list view, I can do that under the desks and offices. And now rather than seeing it grouped together, I can go in and I can see the offices that are available in my space. And okay, so we've created a floor plan. Now, the next item is, once we've created this, once we have these items dedicated in the system, how do we actually go ahead and link them to customers to make that information meaningful going forward? So here, the way that Nexudus links the offices, the dedicated desks, the hot desks, and others to customers is through the contract. The reason we do that through the contract is because the contract actually holds all the information telling us the start date, the cancellation date. So when we're looking at the reports, if we have this link through the contract, it's actually going to give us a much clearer picture of what's happening in your space, and even allow you to project what might be happening later on. Because if you have a cancellation date, you can see going forward that a particular desk or office is going to be canceled, and therefore you can get your sales team on the task and they can come in and look for somebody to fill in that desk or office once the contract is canceled. Now, before we actually go in and look at how to attach those items to a customer, it's really important to note that offices, dedicated desks, and that item called other, they cannot overlap contracts. That means I cannot have office one in two contracts running simultaneously. They have to be at the point where one contract ends, another contract starts and picks up that item. They cannot be parallel, and they cannot overlap dates at all. They have to be a clear cut from when one contract ends and the next one starts. And that's for offices, dedicated desks, and other. Now, for hot desks, because hot desks work a little bit differently, that's not the case. We don't have a dedicated desk. It's not a fixed position for a hot desk customer. Therefore, with hot desks, you can actually have multiple hot desks in, a single hot desk in multiple contracts running parallel. So offices, dedicated desks, and others can only be in one contract at a time. Hot desks, on the other hand, are available to be in multiple contracts at once, okay? So how do we go about adding that to the customer? How do we link that in a practical sense? If we head back to our dashboard, and I'm actually going to quickly jump out of this account. It looks like I inadvertently logged into my own account rather than our webinar here. So sorry about that, guys. Okay, so how do we actually attach that item to a contract? If we head over to finance, contracts, we can see here a list of our contracts. And again, if we have items already set up, in this case, you might not if you've already, if you haven't used this feature before. But in this case, as an example, we do have a few desks and items, and you can see here, they're already linked to a customer. If I wanted to link a desk to an existing contract, I can just go in, I can click on the customer's contract, I can select the desk or office from this little drop-down menu. And let's say I hit 10, we're gonna use desk 10 for this example. I can save, and now we've attached this desk to this contract. Now, keep in mind that we're attaching, in this scenario, a desk to a contract that's already started. So this isn't a contract, a new contract, or a contract that will come into play later on. It's actually been active since the 16th of June. So for Nexudus, what this means is that this desk has been attached or has been occupied since the 16th of June. It's not a matter of when you actually add the date to the, add the desk to the contract, but rather when that contract starts. So if you do add to existing contracts, remember, the occupancy is going to be based on the start date of that contract. Now, this example, we're looking at an existing contract. Now, if we want to create a new contract, one of the really interesting things that you can do with this feature. So for example, let's select Arit. We're going to give him the hot desk. And before we move on, I just want you guys to know the hot desk is priced at 250 pounds, right? So if I select the hot desk as a plan for this customer, and I head over to this little section where it says fixed price, I can basically see that right now it's showing me the price of the plan, the hot desk plan. But if we've set up those target rates or target prices in the items on the floor plan, when I click on an item here, so let's use desk 12 as an example, you can see over here that my price is now being shifted to reflect the target rate that we set up. So this is really useful if you have offices that are different prices. You can set up only one plan for the offices. And then when you're actually going in for the contracts, you can fix the rate, attach the appropriate office to that, and the price will automatically be taken from the item that you've selected. Now, here we have one desk, but what happens if we have two or three? What actually happens is if I add desks, the system then just goes ahead and starts to add those together. So each desk that you add to a contract, as long as you have this little fixed price in toggle enabled, then the system's going to add those up and apply it as the unit price for that contract. So if you're creating a new contract, this is a really useful feature. It allows you to set your floor plan, create your floor plan, and then draw from just one office rather than having multiple plans in your system, clogging up the sign-up process. You can just have one office plan, and you can take care of the unit price by assigning the appropriate desk item or office item to that contract. So if we go ahead and save this, we've now, and this is a great example. So you see, desk 10 is already assigned to Tanuki. We did that in the example below. So if I go in and I remove that, I can now save the contract. Whereas before, because the contracts would be overlapping, it wouldn't allow me to do that. So this is, if you want to add a desk to a contract, you can do that to an existing one. You can add it when you're basically adding a new contract. You can also do this in two other instances. The first one is probably the most straightforward or simplest way, which is if you're adding a customer from the back end, you can add the name, the email as you normally would. You select the item, so let's say private office in this instance, and then we select the appropriate desk or office. Now, the important thing to know if you're going through this process to add the item to a contract is that the price here is always going to be the price of the plan. So if we're adding desks or offices here, we're going to be taking the private or the price of the plan rather than the price of the desk. The price of the desk is only taken when we go into the contract, we fix the price, and we add those desk items there. So keep that in mind if you are creating from the section that the price is going to default to the price of the plan. Now, the last way that we can actually use this desk to assign it to a contract is not actually through a contract, but it's by linking it through the proposals. Now, the proposal is a whole nother feature. It's a fairly big part of Nexudus, and I'm sure at some point we will cover this topic in more detail. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on what happens when we link the desks and offices, but not going through the proposal process, as that's not the goal of today's webinar. But if you're using proposals, what you can do is when you add a proposal, you can select the customer that proposal is going to be for. We can select the plan just like as we would with a contract. And now with the proposal, we can do the same thing. We can select those desks and offices. And here we're going to see the same exact functionality, which is we assign those desks and offices, and the system is going to add those target rates up so that however many desks or offices you add, that's what the price of the plan is going to be, or the contract in this case. So the functionality here works exactly the same as it would in the contract. So do keep that in mind if you're using proposals. Okay, so far we've talked about what floor plans are, basically how to create them in the system and how to assign them to customers. Now, before we move on, the one thing I would like to point out, at least for the time being, is that the floor plan is used on the admin side to assign desks and offices to customers. It's not something that they have the ability to select when they're going through a sign-up process or anything like that. It does have to be assigned from the back end by an admin, okay? So now that we know these things, basically, how do we get information from this? Because we're ultimately trying to get as much information out of the system as possible so we can run our day-to-day operation and make really well-educated decisions. So if we go over here to our slides, we're going to be looking at a few different occupancy reports. The first is desk occupancy by start date, desk occupancy by company, desk occupancy by desk, and then we have desk occupancy by those variables that we inserted in the desk or office items. So the area, the capacity, and the size. Now, within the reports, there's also a few columns that I'd like to explain just so that we're very clear and we're able to read these reports. So we have this little hash sign. This is basically going to, the column that's titled hash is going to display how many items are in use for that particular category. So it can be a decimal because you can have somebody join halfway through the month. So if I start mid-July, in that instance, I'm not using up the full item for the full month. I'm actually coming in at a prorated amount, which means the system's actually going to look at the occupancy as a decimal rather than as a full number. So the number is going to reflect how many items are in use, and they can be decimals. Revenue per month. This is talking about the actual revenue based on the price of the contract. So when we were setting up the contract, we were looking at the price, and it can either come from the desk item or for the plan, whichever option you selected to go with. If you fix the price or if you're using the original price, the system is going to take that into consideration when we're running the reports, and it's going to calculate it based on that actual revenue. So whatever the contract is set for is what this field is going to refer to. We have the percent, which is the percent of total occupancy. And then lastly, we have value per month. Now, I'll show you where this is held and how to use this, but value per month is essentially a field that you use directly in the contract if you want to set, I guess, a target value for a particular contract and see whether or not your actual revenue is matching that. So let's head over to the dashboard. So we've quickly talked about reports. Before that, in the dashboard, you can actually see a quick overview of your floor plan occupancy. So we can see here right now, my total current occupancy is 35%. My office is 25, my desk is 38. And I can see here basically some information around that. You can see that it projects, and again, taking into account that the system looks at whether or not we have that cancellation date set up, we can project into the future and see what your occupancy is going to be as long as, if there isn't a cancellation date. So the system assumes that anything without a cancellation date is a continuous occupation of that desk. If there is a cancellation lined up, then you're going to see that occupied office drop off. And it's a 12-month forward, 12-month backward view here. Okay. The last thing on this little window is if you click on these items, it's actually going to take you to the list of those items filtered here. So if you wanted to be taken to those items, you can just click on that little link and it'll take you right there. So reports. If we head over to the report section, click on occupancy, we have a few different reports here. Now, we're not looking at the price plan occupancy. We actually want to look at desk occupancy. Before we actually even look at this, one thing I'd like to point out is if you want to go ahead and bookmark the different reports that you find most useful, you can do that. And that will actually give you quick access from the portal here so that you don't have to go in and filter that out every time or try and find that. Once you bookmarked it, it makes it much easier to find that item later on. So desk occupancy by company, that's essentially going to show us a report based on the different contracts for a customer along with the team that they're in. So we can see here the different customers, the team that they're in, and Arit, in this instance, we can see that Arit is in he has 2 contracts that apply to him. And what we'll see is that in each row, we're going to see how many items are in that contract. Now, in this particular report, we're not looking at whether or not it's desks, offices. It doesn't take that into consideration. It's purely looking at how many items from the inventory for the floor plan are part of that particular contract. And here again, you can see we do have decimals because you start partway through the month. We have that revenue field, the percent, and the value. And for these reports, you're always going to get a 3-month window, the previous month, the current month, and the following month. And again, the following month being that projection based on whether or not you have the cancellation dates in place. By start date, it's going to be relatively the same information categorized differently. So basically, we're looking at the start date of the different contracts here and the items that correspond to those contracts. Again, a lot of the same information, just basically being displayed a little bit different based on what it's being sorted by. So if we look at by desk, again, we're going to see very similar information categorized or set up differently. So we can see here, we have our offices and then the different offices. So I actually named this one desk, even though it's an office type. We have our desks and you can see how many of them are occupied, who they're by, the start date of their contract. And if there is a term in a contract, you can see that as well. So each item here, now going further down, is going to be based on the information that we set up. So we can see area, we haven't actually set that up. Capacity, on the other hand, I think we do have a few examples. So the capacity of the different items that we have. So we have one item that's a capacity of 0. We have 16 items that are a capacity of 1 and 3 items for a capacity of 2. And you can see how much of that right now is being used. And size, same thing. You're going to see basically a breakdown of the different sizes that you've set up, how many positions fall into that size, and whether or not they're occupied. So for reports, again, I think the main thing is understanding what information you get here so that you know exactly what it's referring to. You know how to manipulate the items by creating these variables yourself, and then later being able to report on it. So the report function is here. And again, some of you guys might have specific questions as you look at your own report. Feel free to reach out to us. We can explain some of these things more in detail, but this should give you a fairly good understanding of how to interpret the information here. And then the last couple of things before we close off our session here today, guys. Alongside all these different reporting functions, the floor plan can actually be used with access control. So if you have access control set up in your system and you link office 1 to a door lock for that office, what will happen is when you assign that office through a contract, the system's actually going to give the customer access to the lock through the contract. So if you have access control, that can be a really useful feature for distributing access. If the paying member of a team, so let's say Tara here gets assigned an office in her contract, then everyone in her team actually gets access to that office as well. So when you assign desks or offices to the main contract of a paying member, then everyone in that team gets access to that door as well. And that way you can distribute access through the floor plan as well. And the last thing I mentioned, we have a little bit of a teaser. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing a new feature, which is the ability to book resources through the floor plan. So what's going to happen going forward is customers, well, first you'll be able to assign a desk or an office to a resource. That way we know what kind of rules that should be booked by, what price it should be used for that particular item. And once you've basically created that connection, you can display the floor plan, allow your customers to come in, select the items, they can add it to a basket, and they can book through the floor plan. And this will be really useful if you are limiting the amount of customers that can use the space. And let's say you have to leave a gap between different desks. You can allow your customers to come in, book those desks out from the floor plan, which will make things a little bit simpler in terms of controlling how many people are in your space at once. So keep your eye out. We'll send out a newsletter about this feature when it's released. But I did want to give you guys a little heads up that that's coming in the next couple of weeks. So that concludes our session today. I hope you guys found it informative. We'll hang around for another few minutes to answer any final questions that you have. But do keep an eye out because we will send an email with a recording for today's call, today's webinar. So yeah, thank you for joining, and we'll see you guys on our next webinar series.